The colonial freighter Starward Hope moved slowly through the dark emptiness of space, like a great whale swimming through a black ocean. Inside its metal walls, 300 people slept and dreamed, and hoped for a new life on a world far from Earth. They had left everything behind. Their homes, their friends, their old lives, all for the promise of a fresh start on humanity's newest colony world. Among these travelers was a small boy named Tommy Park. He was 8 years old with messy black hair and big, curious eyes that seemed to notice everything around him. He sat in the observation deck with his face pressed against the cold glass, watching the stars drift by like scattered diamonds on velvet. His mother, Grace Park, sat beside him reading something on her tablet. She was a xenobiologist, which meant she studied alien life forms. Tommy thought that was the coolest job in the whole universe. Mom, Tommy said, without looking away from the stars. "Do you think there are kids on other planets too?" Grace smiled and put down her tablet. She had the same dark hair as her son and the same curious eyes. "I think there probably are, Tommy. The universe is very big. Too big for us to be alone. I hope I get to meet one someday," Tommy said. "I would show them my baseball cards and teach them how to play catch." Grace laughed softly and pulled her son close. "That's a beautiful thought, sweetheart." Neither of them knew that in less than 1 hour their lives would change forever. The attack came without warning. One moment the ship was peaceful and quiet. The next moment alarms were screaming and red lights were flashing everywhere. The floor shook so hard that Tommy fell out of his seat. People started running and shouting. Children were crying. The air itself seemed to vibrate with fear. "What's happening?" Tommy yelled over the noise. Grace grabbed his hand with a grip, so tight it almost hurt. "Stay with me, Tommy. Whatever happens, do not let go of my hand." They ran through the corridors with dozens of other passengers. Tommy saw things that would stay in his nightmares for years. A wall torn open like paper. Stars visible through the gash. Bodies floating. He wanted to close his eyes, but he couldn't. His mother pulled him forward. The Vectri had come. Tommy had never seen a Vectri before. He had only heard stories. They were tall creatures that looked like giant insects. Their bodies were covered in hard black shells like armor. They had 4 arms that ended in sharp claws. Their eyes were many and red and filled with a cold hunger that made Tommy's blood turn to ice. There were dozens of them pouring into the ship through holes they had cut in the hull. They moved fast. Too fast. Their claws grabbed people and dragged them away. Anyone who fought back was struck down without mercy. The Vectri were slavers. They traveled the galaxy, taking whoever they wanted to work in their mines and factories. They preferred the weak and the small because such creatures were easier to control. They preferred children. Tommy felt the claws before he saw them. Something cold and hard wrapped around his arm and yanked him away from his mother. He screamed. Grace screamed louder. She threw herself at the Vectri, holding her son, and for a moment, Tommy thought she might actually free him. His mother was strong. His mother was brave. His mother was everything. But she was only human. Another Vectri struck Grace from behind, and she fell to the floor. Tommy watched his mother's eyes find his one last time. There was so much love in those eyes. So much fear. So much pain. "Tommy," she screamed. "Tommy, I will find you. I will always find you. I love you. I love you so much." Mom. Tommy reached for her even as the Vectri dragged him backward. Mom. Mom. Then the corridor disappeared, and Tommy was inside the alien ship. The last thing he heard was his mother's voice calling his name over and over until distance and metal walls swallowed the sound forever. The Vectri ship was dark and cold and smelled like something dead. Tommy was thrown into a holding cell with about 40 other captives. Most of them were human, but some were aliens he had never seen before. Strange creatures with too many limbs or not enough eyes or skin that glowed faintly in the darkness. Everyone was scared. Some were crying. Others just sat in silence with empty looks on their faces. Tommy found a corner and curled up, with his knees against his chest. His whole body was shaking. He wanted his mom. He wanted his dad, who had died 3 years ago in an accident. He wanted to wake up and discover this was all just a bad dream. But it wasn't a dream. This was real. And Tommy was alone. A large Vecthory entered the holding area and looked at the captives with those horrible red eyes. This was Thrix, the leader of the raiding party. His shell was covered in scars from many battles. He walked among the prisoners like a farmer inspecting his livestock. When he reached Tommy, he stopped. The boy looked up at the monster towering above him and felt his heart pounding so hard he thought it might explode. Thrix made a sound that the translator device on his chest turned into words. This one is small, fragile. Look at that soft skin. No claws, no armor, no venom. What a pathetic species, another Vecthory laughed. It will break quickly in the mines. Give it 2 cycles at most. Thrix leaned closer to Tommy. His breath smelled like rotting meat. Do you understand me, little creature? You belong to us now. You will work until you die. That is your only future. Tommy said nothing. He just stared at the alien with those big eyes that seemed to notice everything. Thrix expected fear. He expected begging. He expected tears. But the boy's eyes held something else. Something that made Thrix feel strange for just a moment. Then the moment passed and the raid leader moved on. It was just a child after all. A helpless, worthless child. Not worth a second thought. But as Thrix walked away, Tommy was already watching. Already studying. He counted the guards. 6 in the room. 12 more in the corridor outside. He noted how they moved. Where they looked. When they got tired and stopped paying attention. He studied the door mechanism. Simple electric lock. The panel on the left side was slightly loose. Tommy's father had been a physics teacher. Before he died, he had taught Tommy about machines and how they worked. He had taught him about leverage and force and angles. He had made learning feel like a game. Tommy's mother was a scientist. She had taught him to observe, to ask questions, to never stop being curious. She had shown him that knowledge was the most powerful weapon in the universe. And Tommy's grandfather had been a soldier long ago. He used to tell Tommy stories about prisoners of war who had escaped from impossible situations. He had told Tommy that the Parks never gave up. Never. Not ever. Tommy watched the Vecthory guards and memorized their patterns. He listened to the sounds of the ship and learned its rhythms. He felt the vibration of the engines and understood which direction they were going. Everything he saw and heard and felt went into his mind and stayed there. The aliens thought he was helpless. They thought he was broken. They thought he was just a scared little boy who would cry himself to sleep and die. In their minds, they were wrong. Tommy was already planning. He didn't know how yet. He didn't know when. But he knew with absolute certainty that he would escape. He would survive. And he would find his mother again. Because that's what humans did. They survived. They adapted. They fought back. And they never ever forgave. The planet was called Dust 7, and it was exactly as its name suggested. The sky was the color of dried blood. The ground was covered in rust-colored rocks that stretched to the horizon in every direction. The air was thin and hot and filled with a smell like burning metal. Nothing grew here. Nothing lived here. Nothing existed on this world except the mines and the slaves who worked them. Tommy stepped off the transport ship with the other prisoners and felt the heat hit him like a wall. It was so hot that every breath hurt his lungs. The ground beneath his feet was so dry that it cracked with every step. In the distance, he could see the mining facility. It was a massive structure of black metal and dirty concrete that squatted on the landscape like a giant spider. Welcome to your new home, one of the factory guards chittered through his translator. You will work here until you die. That is the only future you have. Accept it. The prisoners were processed quickly. They were given thin gray clothing that did nothing against the heat. They were fitted with metal collars around their necks. The collars would shock them if they tried to escape. They were assigned numbers instead of names. Tommy became Slave 7429. Then they were sent into the mines, the tunnels beneath. Dust 7 were even worse than the surface. They were dark and cramped and filled with dust that got into everything. The slaves used primitive tools to dig out chunks of rare minerals that the Vectory sold across the galaxy for enormous profits. The work was brutal. The hours were endless. The food was barely enough to keep a creature alive. Tommy was assigned to Tunnel 19 with a work crew of mixed species. When the other slaves saw him, they reacted with shock and pity. A human child in the mines. Such a thing was almost unheard of. Such a thing was almost certainly a death sentence. A massive creature named Rala approached Tommy on his first day. Rala was a Gorvian. He stood nearly 3 meters tall and had 4 arms thick with muscle. His skin was gray and rough like stone, but his eyes were gentle and filled with concern. Little one, Rala said in a voice like grinding boulders. You should not be here. This place is not for children. Tommy looked up at the giant alien. I'm here though, so I guess I need to make the best of it. Rala made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been a sigh. Such spirit. It will not last long. The mines break everyone eventually. Another member of the work crew came closer. This was Voss, a being made entirely of living crystal. He glowed faintly purple in the darkness of the tunnel. When he moved, he made soft clicking sounds like wind chimes. The soft ones never survive, Voss said sadly. 3 cycles. Maybe 4. Then they are gone. Tommy did not respond to this. He just picked up his mining tool and went to work. The first week was the hardest thing Tommy had ever experienced. His hands blistered and bled. His muscles screamed with pain. The thin air made him dizzy and sick. The heat was so intense that he thought he might pass out 100 times. Every night he collapsed in the slave barracks and wondered if he would have the strength to get up the next morning. But he always got up. Always. The other slaves began to notice something strange about the human child. While they struggled and suffered, Tommy seemed to adapt. Where they grew weaker, he grew stronger. Where they faltered, he pushed forward. It made no sense. He was the smallest and weakest creature in the entire mine. He should have died within days. What they did not understand was that Tommy had advantages they could not see. His body sweated. This simple thing that most humans never thought about was actually a miracle of engineering. As the sweat evaporated from his skin, it cooled him down. The other species had no such system. They could only endure the heat. Tommy could actually fight it. His blood carried oxygen more efficiently than almost any other species in the galaxy. The thin atmosphere that left others gasping barely affected him. While aliens twice his size stopped to catch their breath, Tommy kept working. And his mind, his wonderful human mind, it never stopped thinking. Never stopped planning. Never stopped looking for ways to survive. Tommy learned which guards were lazy and stopped watching during the middle of their shifts. He discovered that Tunnel 19 connected to the ventilation system through a series of cracks in the rock. He found out where the Vectories stored their weapons and how many guards were on duty at any given time. Every piece of information went into his head and stayed there at night in the barracks. Tommy would sit with Rala and Voss and the other members of his work crew. They would share their food with him because they felt sorry for the little human. They expected him to be sad and broken. Instead, he asked them questions. "Tell me about the other tunnels," Tommy would say. "How many slaves work in each one? What species are they? Do they have any contact with each other?" The aliens found these questions strange, but they answered them anyway. What harm could it do? The boy was just curious. Children were like that. But Tommy was not just curious. He was gathering intelligence. He was building a map of the entire facility in his mind. He was identifying potential allies and potential problems. He was doing exactly what his grandfather had described in those old war stories. He was preparing. One night, about a month into his captivity, Tommy told the others a story. "On Earth," he said, "there was a time when my people were slaves too. Millions of them taken from their homes and forced to work for others. They were beaten and starved and told they were worthless. They were told they would be slaves forever." Rala leaned closer. "What happened to them?" "They fought back," Tommy said simply. "It took a long time. Many of them died. But in the end, they won their freedom. Because humans never give up." Never. Voss made a clicking sound. "Pretty words, little one. But words do not break chains." No, Tommy agreed. "But ideas do. And humans are very good at ideas." The other slaves exchanged looks. There was something in the boy's voice. Something hard and bright, like a flame that refused to go out. They had seen many prisoners come through the mines. They had watched hope die in thousands of eyes. But this child was different. This child still believed it was foolish. It was impossible. It was the most beautiful thing they had ever seen. Over the following weeks, Tommy continued to work and suffer and survive. But he also continued to watch and plan and prepare. He made friends in other work crews. He learned the names of slaves who had been here longest and knew the facility best. He discovered which aliens hated the Vectory enough to risk everything for a chance at freedom. The network grew slowly, carefully, one trusted soul at a time. The Vectory never noticed. Why would they? It was just a child. Just a small, soft, helpless human child who would surely die any day now. Not worth watching. Not worth thinking about. That was their biggest mistake. 3 months after arriving at the 7, Tommy called a secret meeting in the deepest part of Tunnel 19. 12 slaves gathered in the darkness. Rala, Voss, others from different tunnels, who had proven they could be trusted. Tommy looked at each of them in turn. His eyes were calm and steady. His voice was quiet but strong. "I have a plan," he said. "It's dangerous. Some of us might die. But if we do nothing, we will all die anyway. The only question is whether we die as slaves or fighting for our freedom." The alien stared at the human child. He was so small, so young. But in that moment, he seemed as tall and powerful as any warrior they had ever known. "Tell us the plan," Rala said. Tommy smiled, and he did. The plan was simple in its design, but complex in its execution. Tommy had learned from his grandfather's stories that the best plans were always built on small actions that seemed harmless by themselves, but became powerful when combined together. A single spark could not do much, but 1,000 sparks could start a fire that burned down an entire forest. The first phase was gathering resources. This was the most dangerous part, because getting caught would mean immediate death. But Tommy had spent months studying the guards, and he knew their weaknesses. They were arrogant. They believed that slaves were too broken and too scared to try anything. They barely bothered to search prisoners or check the tunnels for hidden materials. Tommy used this arrogance against them. Every day during his work shift, he would hide small items in his loose clothing. A piece of wire from a broken machine, a circuit board from discarded equipment, a fragment of metal that could be sharpened into a tool. The guards never looked twice at the small human child shuffling past them with his head down and his shoulders slumped. He looked exactly like what they expected. A broken creature waiting to die. But under his gray slave uniform, Tommy carried the seeds of revolution. Other members of the network did the same. Rala used his massive size to block the guard's view, while Voss slipped components into hidden crevices in the tunnel walls. Slaves in other sections stole rope and cloth and anything else that might be useful. Each item was small and meaningless on its own. Together, they were building an arsenal. The second phase was communication. Tommy needed to coordinate actions across the entire facility, but the slaves were kept separated by design. Different tunnels, different barracks, different schedules. The Vectri understood that. Unity was dangerous, and they worked hard to prevent it. Tommy found a way around this too. The ventilation system ran through every part of the facility. The shafts were too small for most species to crawl through, but sound traveled through them easily. Tommy developed a simple code based on tapping rhythms against the metal pipes. 1 tap meant stay alert. 2 taps meant pass the message along. 3 taps meant prepare for action. The guards heard the sounds but thought nothing of them. Pipes made noise all the time. It was just a facility settling. It was actually a revolution being organized in plain sight. The third phase was the most important of all. Tommy needed to call for help from the outside. Even if the slaves managed to take control of the facility, they would be trapped on a hostile planet with no ships and no way to escape. They needed rescue. They needed the human fleet. This was where Tommy's mother's lessons proved most valuable. Grace Park had always made her son memorize important information. Emergency frequencies, distress codes, navigation coordinates. She said you never knew when such knowledge might save your life. Tommy had thought she was being overly cautious. Now he blessed her name for her wisdom. Deep in Tunnel 19, Tommy assembled a crude radio transmitter from stolen parts. It was ugly and fragile, and looked like a pile of garbage, held together by wire and hope. But Tommy had learned physics from his father. He understood how electromagnetic waves worked. He knew exactly what frequencies to use, and how to boost the signal so it would travel beyond the planet and into deep space. The night he activated the transmitter was the most terrifying moment of his young life. If the Vectri detected the signal, they would find him within minutes. The punishment for such an act would be worse than death. But Tommy thought of his mother. He thought of her voice calling his name as he was dragged away. He thought of her promise to find him. He pressed the transmit button. "This is Tommy Park," he said into the device. Human child. Age 8. Prisoner at the following coordinates. Requesting assistance from any Earth vessel. Please respond. He repeated the message 3 times. Then he hid the transmitter and returned to his barracks. He slept that night with his heart pounding so hard he was sure the guards could hear it. No one came for him. The message had either failed to reach anyone or help was too far away. Tommy was disappointed but not surprised. He had always known that rescue was uncertain. The plan had never depended on outside help. It would simply make things easier if it came. For now, the slaves would have to save themselves. The fourth phase was recruitment. Tommy needed more people, more species, more hands and claws and tentacles ready to fight. This meant trusting strangers with secrets that could get everyone killed. One wrong choice and the whole network would be exposed. Tommy chose carefully. He looked for slaves who still had fire in their eyes. Those who clenched their fists when guards walked by. Those who helped their fellow prisoners even when it cost them. He avoided anyone who seemed too beaten down or too willing to cooperate with the Vectri. Such people could not be trusted. Slowly the network grew. 50 slaves. Then 100. Then 200. They came from every tunnel and every barracks. Gorvians and crystallines and a dozen other species whose names Tommy could barely pronounce. They were different in every way imaginable. Different bodies, different cultures, different languages. But they all shared the same hatred of their captors, and the same desperate hunger for freedom. Tommy became their leader in a way that surprised even himself. He was just a child. There were warriors and elders and beings who had lived for centuries among the conspirators. But they all looked to the small human boy for guidance. Because Tommy had given them something none of them had possessed before. Hope. The final phase was preparation for the uprising itself. Tommy studied every aspect of the facility and identified its weaknesses. The guards were few in number because the Vectri had never expected serious resistance. The weapons locker was in a central building with only 2 guards. The communications center that connected to the Vectri fleet was even more lightly defended. Most importantly, Tommy discovered that the main tunnel to the surface could be collapsed with explosive charges placed in exactly the right locations. If the slaves could trap the guards underground while taking control of the surface facilities, they would have a real chance of success. He shared these plans with his inner circle. Rala would lead the assault on the weapons locker. Voss would coordinate the teams in the different tunnels. A Corvian named Thresh, who had been a soldier before his capture, would handle the military aspects of the operation. Everyone had a role. Urus. Everyone knew what to do. The night before the uprising, Tommy gathered his closest allies in the darkness of Tunnel 19. They sat in a circle with only a small stolen light to see by. The air was thick with tension and fear and anticipation. "Some of us will die tomorrow," Tommy said quietly. "I want you all to know that. This is not going to be easy. The Vectri are cruel and they will fight hard. But I believe in all of you. I believe we can win." Rala placed one of his massive hands on Tommy's shoulder. The weight of it was strangely comforting. "We believe in you too, little one. You have shown us what courage looks like." Voss made a sound like singing crystals. "Whatever happens tomorrow, you have already given us something precious. You have given us hope." Tommy felt tears forming in his eyes, but he blinked them away. He could not afford to be a child right now. He had to be a leader. "Tomorrow," he said, "at the shift change. That is when their guard is weakest. When the sun rises on Dust 7, it will rise on free people. I swear it." The others nodded. Some prayed to gods Tommy had never heard of. Others simply sat in silence, gathering their courage for what was to come. In a few hours, everything would change. The Vectri Empire had conquered 100 worlds. They had enslaved millions of beings. They believed themselves to be unstoppable. They had never faced a species like humans before. They had certainly never faced a child like Tommy Park. Tomorrow they would learn their mistake, and they would never forget the lesson. The blood-red sun of Dust 7 began to rise over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of crimson and orange. In the mines below, 2,000 slaves prepared for another day of back-breaking labor. The guards yawned and stretched and prepared for the shift change. It was a routine they had followed 1,000 times before. Nothing ever changed on Dust 7. Nothing ever happened. Today would be different. Tommy waited in Tunnel 19 with his heart pounding like a war drum. Around him stood 50 of his most trusted allies. Rala gripped a sharpened piece of metal in each of his 4 hands. Voss hummed with tension, his crystal body glowing brighter than usual. Thresh, the former soldier, had positioned himself near the tunnel entrance, ready to give the signal. The moment arrived with terrible slowness. Tommy watched Thresh counting down with his fingers. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Now, Tommy shouted. Everything happened at once. In 12 different locations. Across the mining facility, slaves turned on their guards with weapons they had hidden for months. The first wave of attacks was swift and brutal. The Vectri were caught completely by surprise. They had grown lazy and complacent. They had never imagined that their broken slaves could organize anything like this. In Tunnel 19, Rala charged at the guards with a roar that shook the walls. His massive form was terrifying to behold. The Vectri fired their weapons, but Rala moved faster than anything that big should be able to move. He reached the first guard and struck with all four arms at once. The guard went down and did not get up. Voss and the other crystalline beings followed close behind. Their bodies were nearly impossible to damage with normal weapons. The Vectri bullets simply bounced off their glittering skin. They crashed into the remaining guards like a wave of living gemstones. Tommy ran through the chaos toward the main tunnel exit. He had a specific target in mind: the communication center. If he could reach it before the Vectri sent out a distress call, the rest of the uprising would have a much better chance of success. Two guards appeared in front of him, blocking his path. They raised their weapons and took aim at the small human child running toward them. Tommy did not slow down. He had prepared for this moment. As the guards focused on him, they failed to notice Thresh coming up behind them. The former soldiers struck with deadly precision, and both guards fell before they could fire a single shot. "Keep going," Thresh shouted. "I will hold the tunnel." Tommy nodded and ran faster. His legs burned. His lungs screamed for air. But he could not stop. Would not stop. Everything depended on the next few minutes. The communication center was a small building near the surface of the facility. It contained all the equipment the Vectri used to contact their fleet and coordinate their operations. If Tommy could take control of it, he could prevent any calls for help. He could also access the facility's automated defense systems. He burst through the door and found the Vectri technicians inside. They stared at him in shock. A human child. Here. Impossible. Their shock cost them precious seconds. Tommy grabbed the nearest heavy object he could find and threw it at the control panels. Sparks flew everywhere. One of the technicians lunged at him, but Tommy ducked under his claws and kicked at the alien's leg. The Vectri stumbled. Before he could recover, Voss appeared in the doorway and tackled him with his crystalline body. The second technician tried to run. Tommy blocked his path. "Sit down," Tommy commanded in a voice that did not sound like a child's voice at all. Now the technician looked into the boy's eyes and saw something that made him obey immediately. He sat. More slaves arrived within minutes. They secured the technicians and began working on the control systems. One of them was a Solarian who had been an engineer before her capture. Her multiple eyes scanned the equipment rapidly. "I can access the defense grid," she announced. "The automated turrets. The security doors. All of it." "Do it," Tommy said. "Lock down the facility. Turn the turrets inward. And find out if they managed to send any messages before we got here." The Solarian worked quickly. "Good news. Their communications are down. They sent nothing. No one knows what is happening here." Tommy allowed himself a small smile. "What about the main tunnel? Did the charges work?" A voice crackled over the facility's internal speakers. It was Rala. "The tunnel has collapsed. 20 guards are trapped underground. They are not coming up anytime soon." The uprising was working. Against all odds, the slaves were winning. But the fight was not over yet. Thrix and his elite warriors were still somewhere in the facility. They would not go down easily. Tommy found them in the central plaza near the landing pads. Thrix had gathered about 15 of his best fighters. They had formed a defensive position and were prepared to fight to the death. Around them lay the bodies of slaves, who had tried to overwhelm them with numbers alone. Tommy walked toward them alone. Rala tried to stop him. "Little one, no. Little one, no. They will kill you." Tommy shook his head. "I need to face him. Trust me." He walked across the plaza with slow, deliberate steps. The Vectri watched him approach with confusion and contempt. Thrix stepped forward with his weapons raised. "You," the raid leader hissed. "You are behind this." A child. A pathetic human child. Tommy stopped about 10 meters away. His voice was calm and steady. "You took me from my mother," he said. "You put a collar around my neck. You called me helpless. You called me worthless. You thought I would break." Thrix made a sound like laughter. "You should have broken. Any sensible creature would have broken. Humans are not sensible," Tommy replied. "We are stubborn. We are patient. And we never forget." Behind Thrix, the automated defense turrets began to move. Their barrels turned slowly until they were pointing directly at the remaining Vectory warriors. Red targeting lights appeared on their armor. Thrix noticed and froze. "What is this?" "This is what happens when you underestimate humans," Tommy said. "We don't need claws or armor or venom. We have something better. We have our minds. And right now my mind controls every system in this facility." The other Vectory looked at each other with growing fear. They were surrounded, outgunned, outmaneuvered by a child. "Surrender," Tommy said. "Drop your weapons and you will be treated as prisoners. Keep fighting and the turrets will cut you down where you stand." Thrix stared at the boy for a long moment. His red eyes were filled with hatred and disbelief. In all his years of raiding and slaving, he had never experienced anything like this. Defeated by a human child. It was impossible. Unthinkable. On Earth, Tommy continued, "We have a saying. Don't mess with a mama bear's cub." "Do you know what that means?" Thrix said, "Nothing. It means that humans protect their young fiercely. But there is another lesson too. A lesson you should have learned before you took me from my home." Tommy stepped closer. His eyes locked with the raid leader's. "The cub learns from the bear," he said softly. "Everything she knows. Everything she can do. The cub learns. And when the cub grows up, the cub becomes something far more dangerous than the bear ever was." Thrix dropped his weapons. The other Vectory followed. One by one, the slavers surrendered to their former slaves. The uprising was complete. 2,000 beings who had been prisoners just hours ago now stood as free people under the blood-red sky of Dust 7. Some wept with joy. Others simply stared in stunned silence. They could not quite believe what had happened. Freedom, real freedom. Something most of them had given up hope of ever experiencing again. Rala found Tommy standing alone near the edge of the landing pad. The massive Gorvian knelt down so he could look the boy in the eye. "You did it, little one," Rala said with wonder in his voice. "You actually did it." Tommy shook his head. "We did it, all of us together. But it was your vision, your courage, your plan." Tommy looked up at the sky. Somewhere out there among the stars, his mother was searching for him, calling his name, waiting for him to come home. "It's not over yet," he said quietly. "We need to get off this planet. We need to find a way home." Rala placed a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder. "We will find a way. If you have taught us anything, it is that nothing is impossible." Tommy smiled for the first time in months. The Vectory Empire had suffered its first real defeat. The slaves of Dust 7 were free, and an 8-year-old human boy had shown the galaxy what his species was truly capable of. This was only the beginning. 40 hours after Tommy had sent his desperate distress call into the void of space, something happened that changed everything. A ship appeared in orbit around Dust 7. Not a Vectory ship. Not a slaver vessel. This was a human destroyer. The U's Vengeance. Captain David Kim stood on the bridge of his ship staring at the planet below with a mixture of confusion and concern. His vessel had been on patrol near the Kepler corridor when they received the strangest transmission he had ever heard. A child's voice, giving coordinates, asking for help. Most captains would have dismissed it as a prank or a trap. David Kim was not most captains. He had a daughter around the same age as the voice on the recording. The thought of any child alone and afraid in hostile space made His blood run cold. He had pushed his engines beyond their safety limits to get here as fast as possible. Sir, the sensor officer reported. I am detecting a large mining facility on the surface. Vectory design. But something strange is happening down there. Define strange, Captain Kim said. The facility's defense systems are active, but they are not targeting us. They seem to be pointing inward. And I am detecting thousands of life signs. Many different species. They are all gathered near the landing pads. Captain Kim made a decision. Prepare a marine assault team. Full combat loadout. We are going down there. The dropships descended through the blood-red atmosphere of Dust 7. Captain Kim rode in the lead vessel with 50 of his best Marines. They were ready for anything. A rescue mission. A combat operation. Whatever they found, they would handle it. What they found was nothing they could have imagined. The landing pads were crowded with beings of every shape and size. Gorvians towering like mountains. Crystalline creatures glittering in the light. Dozens of species that Kim had never seen before. They were all watching the human ships descend with expressions of hope and wonder, and standing at the front of the crowd was a small boy with messy black hair and big, curious eyes. The Marines deployed in a defensive formation. They scanned for threats. They found none. The only Vecteri visible were sitting in groups with their hands bound and their weapons piled nearby. Prisoners, guarded by their former slaves. Captain Kim walked toward the boy slowly. His mind was struggling to process what he was seeing. A mining facility controlled by slaves. Vecteri warriors captured and disarmed. And at the center of it all, a child who could not be more than 8 years old. Tommy straightened his shoulders and attempted a salute. It was sloppy and unpracticed, but the intention was clear. Sir, he said. Prisoner of war Tommy Park reporting. The facility is secured. We have wounded who need medical attention and approximately 30 Vecteri prisoners awaiting transfer. Captain, Kim stared at him. The words made sense individually, but together they seemed impossible. Son, he finally managed. How did you? What happened here? Tommy looked up at the captain with eyes that seemed much older than they should be. It is a long story, sir. The short version is that the Vecteri took me and a lot of other people prisoner. They brought us here to work in their mines. I did not like that very much. So I organized the other prisoners and we took the facility. You organized. Captain Kim shook his head slowly. You are 8 years old. My mom is a scientist, Tommy said. She taught me to observe and ask questions. My dad was a physics teacher. He showed me how things work. And my grandpa was a soldier. He told me that Parks never give up. The captain was silent for a long moment. Then he did something that surprised everyone watching. He knelt down so he was at eye level with the boy. He extended his hand. Tommy Park, he said with deep respect in his voice. It is an honor to meet you. Tommy shook the offered hand. His small fingers disappeared inside the captain's grip. Sir, Tommy said, and his voice finally cracked with the emotion he had been holding back for so long. Can you help me find my mom? Please. I really need to find my mom. Captain Kim felt his eyes burning. He thought of his own daughter. He thought of what this boy had endured. What he had accomplished. The strength it must have taken. We will find her, he promised. I swear to you on my life. We will find your mother. The next several hours were a blur of activity. Medical teams landed to treat the wounded. Transport ships arrived to evacuate the freed slaves. Engineers assessed the facility and discovered it contained minerals worth billions of credits. The Vecteri prisoners were taken into custody for trial, and messages were sent across human space. Messages about what had happened on Dust 7. Messages about a child who had done the impossible. 6 days later, Tommy stood in the corridor of a hospital station orbiting Earth. His hands were shaking. His heart was pounding so hard he could barely breathe. The door in front of him led to a recovery room. Inside that room was someone he had dreamed about every single night since the attack. A nurse smiled at him gently. "She is awake. She has been asking about you constantly. Are you ready?" Tommy nodded. He could not speak. The door opened. Grace Park was sitting up in bed. She was thinner than Tommy remembered. There were dark circles under her eyes from weeks of sleepless worry. But when she saw her son standing in the doorway, her face transformed with a joy so pure it seemed to light up the entire room. "Tommy," she whispered. "Mom." Tommy ran to her and threw himself into her arms. They held each other for a long time. Neither of them spoke. There were no words that could express what they felt. The terror of separation. The hope against hope. The miracle of reunion. It was all too big for language. Finally, Grace pulled back just enough to look at her son's face. She touched his cheek with trembling fingers, as if making sure he was real. "They told me what you did," she said. "They told me everything. Tommy, I'm so proud of you. So incredibly proud. I just wanted to come home," Tommy said. "I wanted to find you. You did more than that. You saved 2,000 people. You defeated the Vectory. You showed the whole galaxy what humans are made of." Tommy shook his head. "I just remembered what you and Dad and Grandpa taught me. That is all." Grace laughed through her tears. "That is everything, sweetheart. That is absolutely everything." Far away across the galaxy, the Vectory High Council received a message. It came from the human fleet that had reduced their nearest military outpost to smoking rubble in retaliation for the attack on the Starboard Hope. Attached to the message was a video. It showed an 8-year-old human boy leading an army of freed slaves out of a mining facility. The message was simple. "You thought our children were helpless. You were wrong. Touch our people again, and we will remind you why humans learned to hunt predators for sport. This is your only warning." The council watched the video in silence. They saw the determination in the boy's eyes. They saw the loyalty of the freed slaves who followed him. They saw what a single human child had accomplished. Against impossible odds, for the first time in their long history, the Vectory felt something they had never experienced before. Fear. Real, genuine fear of another species. They never raided human vessels again. In the years that followed, Tommy Park became something of a legend. His story spread across human space and beyond. People wrote songs about him. Schools taught lessons about his bravery. Other species looked at humans with new respect, knowing that even their children were capable of such extraordinary things. But Tommy did not care about fame or legends. He cared about his mother, who was now fully recovered. He cared about Rala and Voss and the others who had fought beside him and who now lived as free beings across the galaxy. He cared about the simple, ordinary joys of a life that had been given back to him. One evening many years later, Tommy sat with his own children and told them the story of the 7. They listened with wide eyes as he described the mines and the uprising, and the moment when the human ships had appeared in the sky. "Were you scared, Daddy?" his daughter asked. Tommy smiled at her. "Every single day. I was so scared I could barely stand sometimes. But I kept going anyway." "Do you know why?" She shook her head. "Because being brave does not mean not being afraid. Being brave means being afraid and doing what needs to be done anyway. That is what makes humans special. We feel fear just like everyone else. We just refuse to let it stop us." His daughter nodded solemnly. She understood. Outside the window, the stars shone like scattered diamonds on velvet. The same stars Tommy had watched from the observation deck of the Starboard Hope so many years ago. The same stars that had witnessed his capture and his suffering and his triumph. The universe was vast and dangerous and full of wonders. But Tommy Park knew something that most beings never learned. No matter how dark things got, no matter how impossible the odds seemed. There was always hope. There was always a chance. All you had to do was refuse to give up. That was what it meant to be human. That was what it would always mean. The end.